Good afternoon, folks. Happy Friday. Welcome to Archant Towers. Connor Southwell and Samuel Seaman looking ahead to tomorrow's game against Sunderland. We will, of course, be taking your questions, your comments, get them in on whatever platform you're watching this, and we'll endeavour to answer them in the half an hour or so that we're live. It's very rare, actually, that we start these live videos, these preview shows, by talking about the opposition and talking about maybe the opposition's manager. But that is going to be the case today because the story that's been developing throughout the morning surrounding Sunderland boss and a former Norwich manager as well, Alex Neil, has been linked heavily with the Stoke job, to the extent where various reports are now suggesting that he's been granted permission to speak to the Championship club about succeeding Michael O'Neill, who was dismissed yesterday at the Bet365 Stadium. A very interesting development on the eve of Norwich City's visit to Wearside. Of course, he was due to hold a press conference at 9 o'clock this morning. That was then pushed back to 2. I don't think we're going to be live until 2, but I've got my phone on the table in case anything develops whilst we are live. But Sam, in terms of preparation for Sunderland, not great. In terms of preparation for Norwich, maybe that chaos is something. I mean, it tends to go one or two ways. You tend to find that it can unify a team, or that chaos can run straight through the middle of the team. So it's going to be interesting to see where we're at, probably in the next hour, let alone tomorrow afternoon. But what's your reading of this? Because it's very interesting, and also Alex Neil's contractual situation is very interesting as well.
Yeah, I think it could have varying implications on Norwich City tomorrow. If they manage to convince him, which is probably worth stressing, is a reported viability, and it's definitely a possibility that they appease Alex Neil. Probably looks most likely with maybe new signings or a new contract for the man himself. And if they can manage to sort of get that over the line and confirm that he's staying before the kickoff, then you'd think that's going to work in Sunderland's favour. It's going to potentially unify the support base and give them an opportunity to have a real boost ahead of the visit of a club who are expected to be right up there in the Championship. So, it could work both ways. Obviously, as you also outlined, if he leaves between now and then, the chaos at the club is probably going to be a good thing for Norwich. I mean, the new manager bounce is, obviously the statistics on it are variable and not necessarily to be trusted in terms of their reliability, but there definitely does feel like there's a sort of a different atmosphere when a new manager comes in. Obviously, that's not going to be the case by 12:30 tomorrow. I'm making a sweeping assumption there, but I'm pretty sure there's not going to be a new Sunderland manager in place in less than 24 hours. And in that case, they'll just have a sort of temporary solution, a sort of something to plug the gap. And that doesn't necessarily scream new manager bounce to me. Caretaker managers rarely do well, and I think that's the reason, is that nobody really knows where they are. The club's in turmoil, and I think that's what it would throw Sunderland into. It would, take them from being a club on the up and with a lot of momentum, having obviously come up from League One and sort of soared right up. I think they're 5th in the Championship at the moment. It would take all that momentum right out of them, and that would probably work in Norwich's favour. But there are a series of implications, and it's quite difficult to guess what it's going to look like now. At 1:15 the day before.
Yeah, I've just seen another report on my phone suggesting that Alex Neil is set to move to Stoke. So again, I expect this one to have various twists and turns throughout the afternoon, and we'll see what happens. But by all accounts, several reports suggesting that he's taken training this morning, even some suggesting that he's picked the team for tomorrow's afternoon's game. So even if there was someone else in the dugout, it doesn't necessarily feel they're certainly not going to have any training time, and they're certainly not, possibly not even going to pick the team for tomorrow. So all of that, as Sam said, leads to quite a few wide-ranging implications for Norwich City and what it looks like. Alex Neil has been, I think, indirectly expressing his frustration at a lack of transfer business that he feels is done. I know they signed an 18-year-old Costa Rican winger yesterday. They're apparently on the verge of signing a PSG youngster as well. But in terms of frontline options, it doesn't necessarily feel like they've maybe done what he feels they need to do in order to be competitive. He signed a rolling contract in February, so there's maybe not that security. There could be a clause in his contract that suggests if a team that finished in a higher place than Sunderland last year made the approach that it would have to be granted, and that is obviously everyone in the Championship at this moment in time. His stock is incredibly high after the job that he's done. They've lost only 2 league games since he took charge, and one of those was the first first one against MK Dons. So all of that adds up to a very interesting situation for Norwich City. And when Dean Smith sat down at 9 o'clock this morning, he was asked about Alex Neil and what sort of coach he was and what he was expecting from tomorrow. You would imagine that's completely flipped now, Sam. And there's a degree, as we sit here, we don't know what Norwich City are going to face. So does that make things difficult for Dean Smith, or do you almost feed off that uncertainty?
Yeah, I think you'd have to feed off it, really. We know Dean Smith is a manager who likes to react to the opposition he's coming up against, as opposed to a Daniel Farke, for example, who would work mainly on sort of setting his team up with a base setup.
Sorry to cut across you, Sam. Just a bit of an update on the Alex Neil thing. Sky now reporting that Alex Neil is in a car travelling to Stoke for talks. So if he's travelling to Stoke from Sunderland, that 2 o'clock press conference doesn't look like it's going to take place. So that's the latest. The tweet ends is from Keith Downey, who's usually spot on all things North East, has ended his tweet by saying this doesn't look good for Sunderland.
Well, there you are. I think in terms of the impact that has on Norwich, Dean Smith is somebody that likes to react to the system he knows he's going to face. He travelled to watch Sunderland's last game against
Stoke.
There you go. Yeah. I didn't know that. That's worked out well, hasn't it? And he's somebody that likes to react to opposition setups, and in that sense, you suggest it's not going to work in his favour. But there's not really going to be enough time, I don't think, for Sunderland to adopt a totally different approach or change tactical system. I think the coaches in place there that have been probably appointed by Alex Neil and have worked closely with Alex Neil for a long time, presuming that one or two of them will be taking charge temporarily. There's not enough time for them to make those changes, and I think Dean Smith will be coming up against the sort of setup he was expecting to, and the sort of setup he has planned for going into this game. So I don't think it will change things drastically for Dean Smith in the way that he likes to set things up. But equally, and I think we've had a comment already from Hamish that Norwich, if they play the way that they should have. They have played in the last couple of league games, it shouldn't matter how Sunderland play, and they should play them off the park. So I don't think Dean Smith will be necessarily unduly worried by what's going to happen. But I think for Sunderland it's definitely a negative. And from what we know about Alex Neil, sort of championship specialist at this stage in his career, really, and certainly a promotion specialist, having done it 3 times, it's a big blow for them. But Norwich will look to just feed off that and look to thrive in the chaos at the stadium like tomorrow.
Yeah, I've got to be honest, it's not probably for us to comment on the ins and outs of Sunderland Football Club or Stoke City Football Club, but I do find it quite an odd move. He's made it for footballing reasons, which of course we can't assume until he's actually spoken about it. He was, of course, Preston manager for 5 years. So I'm sure he probably has a Northwest based. Maybe there's a family link that has pulled him back there. So not one to assume his reasons for making that decision. If he does make that decision, of course, nothing completely finalised yet. But it does feel slightly interesting given probably the respective size of the clubs. And I don't think I'm being disrespectful to Stoke by saying that. But also maybe what sort of reflection that is on Sunderland, who were, but when he inherited the job, had just dismissed Lee Johnson. I think were widely perceived as being a little bit in a state of flux and a little bit of chaos, and they managed to kind of stumble upon Alex Neil. Of course, they were in talks to appoint Roy Keane for a long period of time. Maybe they'll pick up the phone to Roy. That would be box office, wouldn't it? Although I certainly wouldn't expect him before tomorrow. Yeah, absolutely fascinating to see how this unfolds. Of course, we'll keep on it throughout the day. Pinken.com. The place to go. It also probably makes our life a little bit more difficult, in terms of previewing this game, because as we've already said, it's now going to be very difficult unless Alex Neil does U-turn or does remain at Sunderland to fully predict what Norwich City are going to encounter tomorrow, because Sunderland have started brightly. They've kind of tired in games, I think, as it's worn on. I watched the game against Coventry and a bit of the cup game against Sheffield Wednesday. They've not done too badly. They've adjusted to the division pretty well. How much of that is kind of early season? Oh, look, we're back in the Championship, and the excitement that comes with that, I'm not quite sure. But they do have some talented players. It's just now that element to it, that Norwich City will have absolutely no idea what kind of atmosphere they're walking into, because again, it could go in either direction. The fans could be really flat. There could be anger towards the board. There could be, it could be an us feet them, us feet the world. It could really come together. Teams can pull together in situations like this, and that could be to the detriment of Norwich City's performance. But in many ways, Norwich City know that now going to Wearside although potentially as favourites, not necessarily with the same spotlight that they would have had otherwise.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, I think there'll be probably more spotlight on the game as a whole.
Yeah.
But as you say, Norwich will go into most games this season as favourites and as the sort of national media's choice of team to speak about a little bit more probably. But, come 12 o'clock, or I don't know, whenever Sky Sports coverage starts tomorrow, I think Norwich fans hoping to hear a lot of chat about their side will unfortunately be disappointed. So I think it depends on what sort of player you have, whether they thrive off that sort of lack of spotlight. I think you'd like to think that actually the sort of players Norwich have brought in would probably thrive off that. And in the short term, that may not help them out against Sunderland, where obviously everyone's going to be talking about the team that have potentially just lost their manager. But you want those sort of characters that thrive in, under more eyes and under more pressure. Because those are the players that tend to thrive at the top levels. So, I think Norwich's players maybe will enjoy the spotlight of the game a little bit more, but it will be on them to go and make the conversations about them rather than their opposition. And that's something they've been good at doing the last few games. Their style of play has revolved around their own ability to attack a lot more in the last few weeks than it maybe did before that under Dean Smith. So, I think it's the sort of game where they'll want to make it about them and they'll want to actually stamp their mark on it rather than sort of being happy to hide and thriving on the lack of spotlight. I think they'll want to go and make it about them. But at the end of the day, it's all about the 3 points. And I'm sure if they can come away with a 1-0 win and absolutely nobody's talking about Norwich City, I think they'll still be absolutely delighted, to be honest.
Yeah, I thought I was interviewing a player there with that cliche at the end, all about the 3 points, but it's, that's fine. What I was going to say, and the way I kind of viewed this encounter all week, was it was a really good test for both sides, because as I said, Sunderland started well, and maybe this has got overshadowed a little bit because of events that have happened today surrounding Alex Neil, but Sunderland have started well. They probably want to test themselves against a team who, as we've spoken about so much, and as all Norwich City fans know, are widely tipped to be among the favourites for the division, but also for Norwich City, because a lot of the teams that they've played, maybe the perception has been that they aren't going to be in and around it towards the end of the season. Maybe Hull, as I said at the time, they might knock on the door of the playoffs. I still think that maybe they're a bit like a kind of flashy Lamborghini, that they look quite good at times, but they keep stalling at the traffic lights, and maybe it's the driver that's the issue. But there's enough there that they could sort that out. Beyond them, I don't really see a team that Norwich City have played yet who are going to be fully up there. Millwall may well make the playoffs as well. But Sunderland, because of the start they've had, because of the size of the club that is, the natural expectation that creates, there's going to be 30,000 plus inside the Stadium of Light tomorrow. It felt like a really good test for both sides prior to this chaos, I suppose.
Yeah, it's a shame, because I think it looked like sort of, ex-Norwich manager, two clubs that were right up there. It felt like a real box office clash, which you don't see often in the Championship this early on in the season. Even as somebody who's obviously watched Norwich a lot in the Championship last season when they were in the Premier League, I only found myself really dipping into the second division when it came to sort of the playoffs and the crunch games around promotion towards the end of the season. So to have a game that looked that interesting and looked that sort of appealing from a TV point of view, now potentially had the focus shifted away from it and away from the football and onto one of the clubs in a dramatic negative situation that's happening is a shame. But I suppose for some people, they'll look at it and think it's actually a good thing. I'm sure the TV bosses will be pleased with what's happened, because I think if it's going to go one way, it's going to be the audience is boosted. It obviously takes away that key element that probably Norwich fans were looking forward to a little bit, in that they would have been facing Alex Neil, and not Alex Neil at Preston, where he's sort of been comfortable for a few years and they look like they're going to settle in the mid-table. This was a prime clash with a potential promotion contender managed by a manager who achieved a lot for the football club. And I think it's a shame that it looks like that's going to be taken away from Norwich fans, and it looks like that's going to be taken away from the game. But I'm sure there's still going to be plenty to dig into. And, when you're in the Championship and this slog feels sort of unrelenting, and a lot of the clubs actually feel quite similar, I think to have this drama maybe does separate it a little bit. And it is nice to have a slight change from the sort of patterns that we're seeing, to be honest.
Yeah, it does have a real big game feel to it, actually. And it has done all week. I've been really looking forward to it because of what I said, because it was going to be a serious test. Felt like kind of two heavyweights who were ready to just kind of throw punches at each other. Whether it's going to be that now, I'm not quite sure. My suggestion would probably be not. But yeah, so many sort of unknowns at this stage, probably more about Norwich City's opposition. But if we delve into Norwich, we were both at Colney this morning for Dean Smith's press conference, which feels like a lifetime ago now, given everything that's happened subsequently. What did you make of it? I guess the fitness lines whilst we're here, pretty much everyone has got through. Sam Byram obviously played 45 minutes. Looks like he's okay, although Dean Smith didn't exactly suggest he was going to be ready for a start. So I don't think we'd expect too many changes from the team that beat Maul on Friday night.
No, I think it's probably likely that we see Kenny McLean go back into left back. Sam Byram, it sounds like from what Dean Smith said that they really pushed Sam Byram as far as they could, and that was 45 minutes in the League Cup against a much changed Bournemouth side. So you wouldn't suggest he's going to be primed and ready 4 days later for a lunchtime kickoff in the Championship against one of the Championship's top sides. So I would be very surprised if he starts, to be honest. I think we're likely to see McLean back in that role. The only other change that I maybe foresee is Todd Cantwell coming in for Ono Hernandez, or just somebody coming in. I thought about Milo Rashica.
Just to cut across you, Sam, Sunderland have now released a club statement, which I'll read for you live, literally about a minute ago. It has dropped, and it reads: Sunderland AFC can confirm that Alex Neil has entered into discussions with Stoke City regarding their current managerial vacancy. Following a formal approach by Stoke, the club is contractually obliged to permit the head coach to start a dialogue with the Potters. The club is committed to retaining Alex's services as head coach and will be making no further comment at this time. So that is basically confirmation of what we spoke about beforehand, now official. Alex Neil is in talks with Sunderland over their managerial vacancy on the eve of Norwich City's visit to the Stadium of Light, which, as we spoke about in the first 15 minutes of this show, creates an interesting narrative, plenty of unknowns for next season. I guess that tomorrow, I guess the interesting line there was, and we kind of floated this idea about being contractually obliged to let him speak to Stoke. That obviously is the case. So that's interesting. Sorry, Sam, for interrupting. I don't know if you can remember where you were.
I think I was on Ono Hernandez and who he might be replaced by. Because I think Milo Rashica towards the start of the season would have been in with a shout, but he's probably found himself behind Hernandez now and behind a number of Norwich City players after such a poor start to the season. And he really does need to start producing if he wants to be in and around that. So I think it's probably likely Todd Cantwell comes in. It seemed like for that Millwall game, Smith was making more of a tactical change than a sort of personnel one, or being disappointed with Cantwell's performances in recent games. I think having a natural winger was probably important when they had a central midfielder at left back, so that it wasn't all, the team wasn't lopsided. We know how important balance is to Dean Smith, but I just think Hernandez maybe struggled, and I think in a possession-based side, I don't know if Hernandez is the best option from the start, really, because he does struggle against sort of packed, energy-filled legs, and it probably suits him a little bit more to come on for that last 20-30 minutes and face a side that's tiring a little bit, and maybe where there's more space on the pitch. So I think for the early parts, I maybe do expect to see somebody like Todd Cantwell come back into the lineup and look to break that Sunderland team down with the more conventional, creative passing style that we've seen them be successful with in a few games. But other than that, they've won 2 league games in a row. That League Cup game had pretty much no bearing on selection, apart from maybe Gabriel Sara pushing his cause a little bit. I thought he was pretty good. So yeah, it would be very harsh to drop any of these players after a sort of a good run. But I think looking at the bench will probably be quite interesting in terms of, and it's another debate, but the sort of Jordan Hugill striking situation now with only 7 players on the bench and all of those fringe players seemingly pushing at the same time. It's going to be interesting to see who actually makes their way into it, even the dugout, rather than the starting 11 maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, Alameda back as well, which is another body for Dean Smith to try and fit on that bench of 7, which, as I've said on numerous times, to have 5 subs and a bench of 7 feels like they don't quite match. In the Premier League, they have 9, of course, so you naturally have more options. That isn't the case in the Championship. And I guess, Sam, in many ways, the fact that Adam Ida's back, scored on Tuesday night, it was a substitution that brought him and Pukki onto the pitch. They combined for Norwich's second goal. That puts even more pressure on Josh Sargent, because we've spoken so much about him grabbing his opportunity and the goals that he scored. The second one in particular against Millwall, they both were, well, they all have been really, including the Birmingham game, but the second one in particular against Millwall that he took with such confidence. And it was a goal of a striker who is really kind of hit a purple patch at this moment in time. But if Norwich are frustrated and there isn't a goal for him, you can already foresee a situation where Dean Smith turns to his bench and kind of brings on those two again and changes the system to what we saw on Tuesday night.
Yeah, it shows you how quickly football can change, really, because Josh Sargent was probably towards the bottom of the striking pecking order even 2 weeks ago. Now he's above Teemu Pukki, Adam Ida and Jordan Hugill, 2 of which have scored this week. And the other one, who scored 26 goals the last time Norwich were in the Championship. So, it does feel quite a bizarre situation. And if you would have presented us with this even a couple of games into the season, I think we would have been very surprised. But it shows you the strength and depth, really, that probably 2 or 3 of those players could have a shocker. And if one of them produces, one moment of quality in the match that they've done already in the last couple of weeks, Norwich have a really good chance of getting a result. So that's going to be incredibly encouraging for Dean Smith. It will be interesting to see how he sort of does that. I think the tactical change provided by having Pukki and Ida up front, and maybe the slightly increased dynamism that provided, did give an interesting window into an option that Smith might have from the bench, and I think he could look to utilise that. But equally, he's going to certainly give Josh Sargent a good go after the form that he's found, and I think he'll back himself to score again. So it will be interesting to see if they come on, the sort of order they come on in. But I think Sargent will be hoping he can bag a goal before those attacking substitutions are needed, and maybe he can use that sort of pressing side of his game, because he's given Norwich the lead, and he won't need to be replaced by those players to try and look for that creativity or try and add bodies in those attacking areas. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how he does that. There are also other sort of facets, because if you have all 3 of those on the bench, there's going to be 1 or 2 experienced individuals who aren't going to be particularly happy to be dropped, but are going to have to be. So it'll be interesting to see what Smith does. I think he's probably, going to have some difficult conversations. He's probably already had some difficult conversations about which players are going to be doing what. And I'm going to be keeping a close eye when we see those players sort of wandering out onto the halfway line and having a look around the stadium as they do before kick-off, because I think that's almost going to be as interesting as the 11:30 on the dot when the team news drops.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating. I guess from Sargent's perspective, he has that shirt right now, doesn't he? It's up to him to go and prove it. How he's going to squeeze Pukki and Ida onto the bench, as well as Gabriel Sara and Cantwell, one of Cantwell and Hernandez, or all of the other options that he's got is going to be very difficult. But I think he said on numerous occasions that, not that he's happy to have good players in the stands, of course, but he'd rather that than not have them at all, as perhaps was the case last season. I think he's made that point a few times. But managing that is going to become incredibly difficult, particularly if Josh Sargent now does go on a run where he continues to score goals. But it doesn't feel like it's going to take a lot to kind of flip the other way, or back into Teemu Pukki's direction, or back into Adam Ida's direction. And of course, Dean Smith did find some joy of a 4-4-2 with Ida and Pukki in the Premier League, albeit kind of on 2 occasions before Ida got injured, and that kind of scuppered the momentum that they had gathered. But it's clearly something that's worked before. It's something that he turned to on Tuesday night. It could be something that he turns to again if Norwich City need a goal or are chasing a game. But I guess it's nice to have that flexibility. And we speak about competition, Sam. That's the case all over the pitch. He was asked again today about the goalkeeping situation. Tim Krul, Angus Gunn. I think we saw Angus have a really good game on Tuesday night, made a number of exceptional saves that kept Norwich City in the game, including one that they went down the other end of the pitch, to score from, which was Ida's goal. It feels interesting at the moment how that's going to pan out between 2 goalkeepers that Smith admitted today he doesn't see a lot between in terms of quality. It's probably Krul who's got the edge based on experience.
Yeah, and you have to feel sorry for Angus in that situation, really. Because, as you said, he's been turning out incredible performance after incredible performance, and that omission from the final day of last season was as curious a thing as I've ever seen really in terms of a team selection. The only thing I thought once I saw that was that Krul was off. Obviously, that hasn't turned out to be the case, and doesn't look likely that it's going to be the case when the transfer window slams shut next Thursday. So it was quite curious, and you do sort of feel for Angus, because it's almost a case of he's taking his opportunity every time he's involved, and he's still not enough to get in the team. As we know, Dean Smith likes to have that sort of experienced, sturdy backbone and spine in his team. That's why he's got Krul in goal so regularly, Grant Hanley at centre back, Kenny McLean in midfield, and Tamer Pukki up front. And that's why that's what he prefers, or part of the reason why at least. So it's almost a case of chicken and egg with Angus, because he doesn't have as much experience as Krul. He needs to improve his experience, but how do you do that sat at Norwich as the number 2? And maybe that's going to be something for as long as this Krul saga develops, and as long as he continues to be the number 1, and he's at a certain age now where probably retirement isn't particularly far away, but he is a goalkeeper, so he could have conceivably 3 or 4 or 5 years even. And the longer that stretches out, the more it looks like Angus maybe isn't as destined to be Norwich City's number 1 as he looked at one stage to be. So I think that patience may be growing slightly thinner than it was at one stage, and I think that would be justified given some of the performances he's given. But from a team perspective, it can only be a good thing if you've got somebody pushing the goalkeeper. We saw the impact Ralph Fairman had on Tim Krul a few years ago. I don't think he even really played in any significant games for Norwich City, and got injured in the one that he did at Crystal Palace, and yet it was Krul's best season in a Norwich shirt by quite some distance, and I think you could tell that was part of the reason why. So from a Norwich City point of view, it's fantastic that they've got this, but looking at it long term, it doesn't feel particularly sustainable to have 2 goalkeepers that are performing that well at such a high level continue to be happy to play those roles, or for Angus to play that role as a reserve goalkeeper. But right now, Norwich are getting, you'd argue they're likely to be getting the best out of both of their goalkeepers from this battle, so it can only be a good thing.
Yeah, and of course there is a natural opportunity for Angus potentially if Tim Krul goes to the World Cup in November, and I think he is probably expecting that to be the case. So if that is the case and he does go to the World Cup, of course the Championship resumes after the group stages on the 10th of December. So providing Holland get through their group, which I think we would all assume to be probably relatively likely, if not nailed on, then there would be a window for Angus to have an opportunity in the Championship. And then, similarly to Sargent, it would be up to him to kind of take it. But then I guess the flip side of that is, he may argue that he got an opportunity in the Premier League before maybe being quite harshly removed towards the back end of the season, but also back in kind of February, March time after that Southampton game, or for that Southampton game. So going to be an interesting one to watch, an interesting dynamic, as Sam said. We'll end the show just before we get on to kind of how we see the game tomorrow by talking about transfers. Smith said, as he has done, I think, for the last 4 or 5 press conferences, and he probably will for the next few as well. And he did make a little joke that he's got 4 more press conferences before the end of the window to update us on the left-back situation, which he was obviously overjoyed about, by saying that their talks are ongoing, or their search is ongoing regarding the signing of a left-back. They've got 6 days now to do that. I think there is confidence that they will manage to achieve that. 6 days left of the window. Feels like it's going to be a loan. Let's see kind of what develops in the days ahead. I would probably expect something to pop its head post weekend, now that we're in a game cycle. But again, one to watch. In terms of outgoings, nothing to really report, Sam. I mean, I did a piece this morning about potentially 4 players who could be on their way out. I think Josh Martin is fairly common knowledge. Jordan Hugill, another one, as we spoke about earlier, who's struggling to get in matchday squads at the moment, let alone getting to Norwich City's first team. And then the 2 big ones, which are Milo Rashica and Max Aarons, which, as I've said countless times already, whilst there's a transfer window open, there's going to be speculation about those 2.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I'm sure they've got 2 agents that aren't extremely happy with their situations at Norwich City at the moment. And that's probably going to come into play in the next few days as we close on the transfer deadline. But, we spoke to Smith this morning and put that question to him. He said he didn't know anything. I think part of that answer is it's worth considering, is that he's not the sporting director, and I think that head coach sporting director model does sometimes give a quite easy get out in the press conference scenario, because you can say it's not my job, and that is accurate. Stuart Webber will be the first man that opposition clubs call if they're interested in Norwich City players, and he's in charge of that side of things, and he obviously doesn't have to answer those questions. So it's probably something that's going to remain behind closed doors as time goes on. It's certainly something I don't think Dean Smith is going to want to big up as somebody that has to put those players out on the pitch and be responsible for results. I think he's certainly not a man that's going to be comfortable with losing Max Aarons this late in the transfer window. But as we've spoken about countless times before, Norwich plan ahead, and they've probably got a list of 5 or 6 names, if not more, that they could replace Max Aarons with, and that they're confident they'd be able to if an offer came in and they felt it was the right offer and there was enough time to get that replacement in. So
I'm sure they've had that list for 4 or 5 years as well.
Yeah, exactly. I think there was that was quite a good line from this press conference, actually, that Kenny joked with Aarons that he'd be playing in his testimonial in a few years. I don't know if I have quite the same confidence as Kenny on that topic, but yeah, I think it will be interesting to see if anything develops. There certainly hasn't been the sort of interest that I think a lot of people were expecting going into the window, but in today's market, he's an expensive player. He's an English 22-year-old, and it's hard to invest that amount of money for a lot of clubs in the current market, which is deflated, which is struck by COVID still, and we're still seeing the ripples of that impact. And there's a lot of loans going on, a lot of structured payments. There's not so many big money transfers as we were seeing before. So I'm not particularly surprised to see maybe less interest in those names than we were expecting to see at the start of the window. But there's still plenty of time. We know how much teams panic, and not every team plans as far ahead as Norwich do. There could be teams that are now only turning their heads to Milo Rashica and Max Aarons that are going to start trying to make a noise ahead of the transfer deadline. But if I was a Norwich fan, I wouldn't worry that they're going to be caught short in any particular areas, and they're going to have to muddle through a little bit like they do in the left-back situation. I think they would only sanction the departure of Max Aarons or Milo Rashica if they felt that either they had the replacement within the club already, or that there was a replacement that they could readily go out and get.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen various comments about Alex Neil. We spoke about Alex Neil in the first half of this show. Once we've finished being live, you'll be able to go back and rewatch that for our thoughts, and we'll probably touch upon it again now, because I'm about to ask Sam kind of what he's expecting tomorrow, which is is a really difficult question now in light of kind of everything that's happened. With the Sunderland manager's position, he's reports to be believed now on his way to speak to Stoke. So I don't think that 2:00 press conference is going to be happening, and it doesn't appear to be the case that he's going to be in the dugout for Sunderland's game against Norwich City at lunchtime tomorrow. Of course, any updates throughout the day, we'll have it on pinken.com. We ourselves are making the trip up to Sunderland later this afternoon. Well, not Sunderland, North East, just kind of 40 minutes from Sunderland also. So it's going to be an interesting one to follow. So Sam, I've given you, hopefully I've filled enough time there for you to think about it, but what are you expecting from tomorrow's game? Because it's probably completely flipped from the sort of game we were expecting this morning to probably what it looks like now at this moment in time. As things stand, Alex Neil is the Sunderland manager. By the time people may watch this later this evening, he might not be the Sunderland manager.
Yeah, I may even have gone for a 3-2 before. I think under Neil as a manager that likes to really attack games, and with the momentum of that's behind Sunderland at the moment, I think there would have been a lot of goals. Unfortunately, it looks like it's going to be a slightly flatter atmosphere at the Stadium of Light than we were expecting. That's probably good news for Norwich, and I will go for a 2-1 win. I think for Norwich, because I think they're in a good position now going into this game. They've probably got much more clarity and a much cooler head than a lot of the Sunderland players and fans will be going into the game for. And I think it will be very interesting to see what happens. But I'm back in Sarge to get another goal, and I think it's going to be a 2-1 win for Norwich in around the circus that's probably going to be whipping up around them. What about you?
It's going to be fascinating to be at the Stadium of Light tomorrow, isn't it? Yeah. And probably not for the game, if anything else. I mean, all of this for me hinges on what kind of reaction they get. I can already see a a deflated Stadium of Light, a stadium that is, if Norwich can get the first goal, willing to turn probably on its board of directors and those running the football club. That presents a potentially very difficult atmosphere for Sunderland, but potentially one that Norwich can reap the benefits from. So I think for me, if they can get the first goal, and it feels it's always crucial in every game, the first goal is that old cliche, isn't it? But particularly tomorrow, if they can do that, they can turn the crowd, they can get the momentum, and they can start playing with confidence. Then I think now you look at it probably as maybe, I don't want to say an easier game because that maybe is the wrong terminology, but maybe a more enticing game for Norwich City than perhaps it was this morning when Alex Neil was still in post. So it's going to be interesting. It's not going to be a dull afternoon. I expect it's going to be one with full with twists and turns already to come yet, and that's not just my driving. So we'll see how it pans out across this afternoon, and we'll see what sort of situation we're in when we get to the Stadium of Light tomorrow for the team news, which of course you'll be able to watch live on all of our channels when that drops, and we'll be there for full match coverage and analysis and reaction as well from Dean Smith and whoever is in the Sunderland dugout at that point after the game. Thank you very much for watching. Enjoy the rest of your Fridays. Massive invisible hat off to those Norwich fans getting up at, they're leaving at 4:30, so they're going to be up significantly earlier to make the trip. Absolutely ludicrous that is the case, but I'll probably save my rant for a column that I'm about to write. So hats off to those. We'll see you all in the Northeast. Enjoy your Friday. See you soon.